IRC, specifically our WOC marketplace. For that, I'd like to invite you to travel back in time to October 25th, 2022. So at NextConf last year, they dropped this, and they released this with their new app router. And immediately I was sold, because I could await data directly in my components and render it in my JSX right below that. I've always wanted to do that, and this made it possible. It solved many of the gripes I had with get server-side props and passing things down, and I see like some of you guys have had the same issues. So on October 26th, I started my first side project and was experimenting with Next 13 since then. We'll step into the time machine again and go forward a few months, where I came to WOP, and this is what our homepage looked like. So it had a few issues. We had performance issues in the code. We had code quality issues, which made it hard to work with performance issues. And as you can probably see, our design work needs some improvement. So these are a bit more concrete issues that we had. So we were built on top of Next 12 with a mix of useQuery, React Query, and get server-side props for our data fetching. It was very messy. We had our entire site client-side rendered, and the UI was driven by a fetch request to the server for some dynamic templating, which resulted in tons of waterfalls and ugly skeleton loaders when you first visited the site. Furthermore, once those fetches resolved, the content didn't perfectly match up with the loader and resulted in a lot of layout shift. And it was not a great experience for a marketplace. So we wanted to improve that. I think there's a statistic from Walmart that said for every 100 milliseconds you shave off your loading time, they gained an extra 1% in revenue. So we wanted to do the same. Also, we had some pretty significant styling issues. I really liked Tailwind CSS at the time, and I still do. I think it's a great framework to be able to write really fast components. But our code base was littered with bootstrap utility classes, and we found them impossible to remove. And the reset CSS from both frameworks were fighting each other, resulted in terrible artifacts like invisible buttons and weird layout things that were very hard to debug. So that led to the third thing was our designers worked very hard on a new design for our marketplace, which looks a lot better. And I wanted to build this in a fresh start with a code base. And based off my experimentation in the past couple of months with React Server components and the app directory, I thought it would be a great experience. So we wanted to make a new app that we could build on for the next couple of years, or at least for the long term, until Next releases a new version, new router. So this is what we ran in February, and we embarked on a pretty wild adventure over the next few months. In this talk, I'm going to share how we tackled some of the issues. So these were our goals. So we wanted to improve our core web vitals by SSRing. We wanted to use Tailwind as our styling system, get rid of Bootstrap, get rid of Sass, get rid of all the other solutions we had, one unified thing. We really wanted to focus on caching. To have really fast load times, but also to take the load off our Ruby backend API, which, as we were getting users, started having scaling issues. We wanted to have really clean, maintainable code, which is always very difficult. We didn't want to have to modify the existing code base, but most importantly, we wanted to have an incremental release and have it really be easy to roll out in case we screw up, which was very helpful. So this was the plan. We were going to host 2 Next.js apps on Vercel. we're going to assign our main domain to the second one, the new version, and then we're going to rewrite traffic from v2 to v1. In case something blows up, we can easily swap the domain back to the old site and everything goes as planned. So how can we rewrite traffic from v2 to v1, and what does that involve? Those of you using Next might be familiar with the middleware.ts convention, but I'll quickly go over it. So this is what the middleware file looks like. And basically it's an async JavaScript function where you can do some processing on every single request that hits your Next.js app. And it runs on the edge, so it's super fast and super close to users. You can determine static, like you can rewrite to different static files and the performance hit isn't too great. So our plan was to figure out whether a request is asking for a v2 resource or a v1 resource. If it is a v2 resource, we would, oh sorry, that's a typo, it should be v1. If it is a v1 resource, then we can rewrite it to our old app, and if it's a v2 resource, we just forward the request on and let Next.js handle it normally. So how do we deal with the hard part? Well, the first part is very easy. We simply list out all the paths that we want in our new app. Why do we need to do this? Well, our new app was initially just the homepage and a few extra pages that we wanted to redesign. We had a lot of existing functionality on our old app that we didn't want to immediately rebuild, such as our account page, our orders page, our settings pages, and all of that. So we listed out all the paths that we had rebuilt, and we simply returned that. But that doesn't quite work. Next.js obviously server-side renders your page, but then it asks for a lot of bundles which contain your style sheets, your CSS bundles, your JavaScript bundles, your fonts, and they're all stored in the _next path prefix for both apps. And there's no way to customize that, unfortunately. So the referrer header comes to the rescue. The referrer header is a header sent on every HTTP request that contains the URL that you can see in your browser. And we can use that to determine whether the _next file request was made from a page that's in v2 or a page that's in v1. And this was the logic we added. So does this work? Yes, but our images didn't work. So why is that? Our images are in the public folder, so they weren't within the v2 paths array that we put. So an easy fix was to add those to the set and call it a day. But that's not very maintainable. As we added more images to v2, we found that we kept having to modify that file, and it was getting forgotten, and we were having 404 issues. So this wasn't the solution. Instead, we came up with a pretty crazy idea. What if, before every build, we run some custom Node.js that looks through our files and parses the directory and then modifies the middleware.ts file to include all the set of files that are currently in our folder. So basically like a live file watch on top of Next.js's file watch that already exists. This is our file called middleware_codegen.ts, which still exists in the repo. And it looks through the relevant directories, so our current public directory and the old marketplace public directory. It then uses some regex to parse the middleware file and replace the line of code that defines the static files with the new static files just calculated live. And then it overrides the middleware.ts in our codebase. And we can put it in our next config .js file, and that means that this code will run every single time the next server decides to hot reload your files, and it basically works out of the box. So after that, everything worked, and we were able to release our marketplace on our V2 marketplace on warp.com. Traffic hit as users navigated to our product pages and their accounts page. They seamlessly hit the old marketplace without them realizing that there was two Next.js apps running on the same base path. And the question is, was it worth it? And I think the answer is yes. Because as soon as we dropped this, our real experience score on Vercel increased by over 200%, from 45 to 98, which was an incredible thing to see after one massive code change. And not only that, our Lighthouse scores, I just ran this test today on the incognito tab. They boosted up to like very green. We have some little bit of work to do on our accessibility, but it's already looking great. We also have a brand new code base with a great styling setup and with new patterns that we implemented so that we can continue to work on this in a great way. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. So if you like what you see and what the kind of engineering that we're doing, if you'd like to work with us, we are hiring. We're hiring for a staff front-end engineer, and we're hoping to build some more crazy stuff. Any questions?
I have a comment. So this is awesome. I think it's. Do you know the name of this pattern that you're using?
Which pattern?
It's like a software design pattern. It's called the Strangler pattern.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the Strangler pattern, it can be used for a front end like this, but it can also be used for APIs, like for backend services.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's this idea about the Strangler plan.
Yeah.
Basically, strangle until the point where V1 eventually dies.
Yes. We're very close to that right now.
Awesome. Great job.
Yes.
So, you talked a lot about rewriting the first page. How much of the old app is still left?
We have, I think, a handful of API handlers left. And over the past 9 months now, we've slowly been able to migrate pretty much all the pages that users see. I think there's only one page that is visible to the user left on the old app.
Nice, that's cool.
Yes?
How about mutations? How would the migration path for them look like?
Mutations?
Yeah.
What kind of mutations?
Like, I don't know, like inside your app, if there's some user interaction, like for example, I don't know, a user adding something or removing something.
Yes.
So how that...
So all of those mutations, we use mutation, like the hook was client side.
Okay.
So they just hit our API endpoint.
Okay, so yeah.
The same code works on both sides. Yeah. Yes.
To be clear, when you were solving the graphics problem, that runs every time you do a build, or does that run constantly?
So if you're in the dev server,
Okay.
it runs every time like there's a file system change and Next decides to reload the next.config.js. On production, it only runs at build time.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
What I'm not familiar with the real experience metric. What does that entail? The Vercel one?
So that's a metric Vercel puts on all of your projects. I'm not exactly sure how it works either, but it takes into account a lot of what the Lighthouse scores take into account and puts it into one number. But
yeah, and it's based on your actual users that are visiting your site and what their metrics are.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true. That's right.
Yeah. That's why it's the real experience score.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, like I'm new to React. So which you are doing, like all the images, you are just running all the images and updating that path set in the
code. Yeah.
I believe like instead, I mean, it could be a performance bottleneck maybe if we have 10,000 images or 20,000 images. Maybe right over there, like maybe lazy loading might be good. I believe like this, in my opinion.
Yes, no, that makes sense. So the reason why this was fine in our case was we didn't have that many images or that many static images or static files in our assets folder. And we knew that this would only run at build time, so it wouldn't affect anyone hitting our site in real life. It wouldn't run there. Yes.
At the beginning, you were mentioning some of the metrics of why you guys decided to move to server components.
Yes.
How do you make the metrics, and what really drove you to really make the decision that React Server Components or server render in general will make the bigger impact that you were looking for?
So I think a lot of it was down to us not getting what we wanted with our current approach, and we saw the way Next.js was moving, and we thought, I really agreed with the philosophy of React Server Components and the app router and fetching a lot of data on the server. It made a lot of sense to me and the other engineers in our team. So we decided to give it a go. See how it went, and it's worked out quite well for us. We had a few stability issues that are slowly getting resolved, especially in dev mode. But Next 14 solves a lot of performance issues. Yes.
Were you able to increase the revenue based on the changes?
We did not do a proper measurement, but our revenue has increased due to many factors. Yeah. Yes.
Is there anything different you have done in retrospect?
In retrospect, I think in an ideal world we wouldn't have had to try it that early. When we launched, the app directory was still in beta, and they recommended not to use it in production, but we did anyway, and it worked. So ideally we wouldn't have had to launch that early, but on the flip side, right now I'm very happy that we are on the app directory and we are on the technology that Next is actively pouring efforts in to improve. So we're able to take advantage of the new partial pre-rendering once that becomes stable and all of the future features that come out. Yes?
I was gonna say, how did you handle SEO for, I guess, the new version?
As the new version, we were able to copy all of the tags and meta tags over from the old version that we had, and during that improve them, add more links, and also we ran on the same domain, so all of our domain authority and things like that. I'm not exactly sure how it works, I'm not an expert, but they carried over and continue to work. Yes.
When you made the decision to switch to Tailwind, did you get much pushback? I love Tailwind, but it seems to be a very controversial thing.
I think a lot of people, a lot of our engineers love Tailwind, so there wasn't much pushback. We kind of realized that the bootstrap SaaS way was not great, and Tailwind was better, so we sent it.
And with React Server Components, you can't actually use any CSS in JS solutions. So you have your basic. I think the only modern version of styling without CSS in JS is Tailwind.
Yeah.
Everything else is like old and outdated.
That was another reason. Yes.
How, like this decision of refactoring and making server components came from a leadership decision, or like were you like pushing to your boss leadership, you know, like, hey, we should move through these approaches? I guess that the question is, how do you convince the team that this was first a good approach, and two, that it was going to solve?
Yeah, so we were kind of in a lucky position where we had to rebuild an entire site, and that kind of makes it easy from to choose a new technology, because we had to start again from scratch anyway. And the second part was to convince them it was a good idea.
Yeah, you know, like at least for me, React Server Components is like something relatively new, and trying to convince leadership to adopt this type of technology might be sometimes problematic, because they might not either know about it, or they just say, no, we don't have time to do this kind of stuff, right? So yeah, like kind of the trade-offs, you know.
I mean, Sharky is our CTO, so did I do a good job of convincing you?
We didn't really have a choice. Like Bootstrap, Bootstrap was holding us down, and we needed to build this new thing. So we kind of weighed all the options, and it was like, we can remove all Bootstrap from all our old bad code, to be honest. I mean, we built it so fast, or we can try to play with this new thing. We didn't know we had to do this in the beginning. This plan evolved over time, but it was definitely the right choice in terms of like the time trade-off of having to refactor code that we knew was going to be killed. So it was a clear choice.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess something I wanted to ask is, what was it like sort of introducing the idea of like putting two Next.js apps on one pad? I know microfrontend is pretty new, sort of, it's early infancy stages, but I saw some work being done on Next.js with microfrontend, and I'm curious to know like what you think about that.
So there's a really great way of doing microfrontends, which is separating your apps by path name. Next.js has great support for that, and we tried to use that as well by putting our old app on a base path and sort of hiding that using rewrites. I think that works great, because then you don't have to deal with any of the _next bundles or any of the static files. It adds all of the paths automatically for you. But putting them on the same path, I wouldn't recommend unless you're in a similar situation task where you're rebuilding the index page. I think that we currently use a similar setup with a base path for our sort of auth app, which handles our login, handles our cookies, handles everything as a separate self-contained app, but it's still running on walk.com/auth, and that is a separate Next app on a base path, and it works great.
Yeah, so those all metrics look like a lot of improvement from that basic design. You said some things like accessibility that could be improved. Is that in the design itself, like some contrast issues, or is that something that you just have to go on some of those pieces?
Yeah, I think it's very much to do with that. Okay. As we were building it, we didn't fully think of all the accessibility things. So as we go along, we just probably have to follow the recommendations that the editor prints out. Yeah.
Did you have any like centralized storage like Redux? How did you handle that?
We didn't. That was one of the reasons this was possible. We had all of our queries, all of our front-end data in useQuery and the handset query. So we have a GraphQL backend API, which is really nice for the types. And the client-side queries, they would just refetch again when navigating over to the other app. On the new app, what we can do now is use a fetch request or a type fetch request in the server component to fetch the data, and then pass it as the initial data to the use query hook, which means we can server-side render data and then update it on live on the fly.
Did you run into any caching issues with the middleware?
We did run into some issues with Vercel caching post requests, which they did not document. But other than that, the middleware didn't introduce any caching issues. Particularly, it was easy because our old app wasn't cached, so we didn't have to worry too much.
So, any issues or obstacles that you didn't cover that you think you should bring up?
I think, yeah, so the code I covered was a very simple version of the code that we actually have. We cover a lot more edge cases, and we have a sort of external domains product where you can bring your domain and we will host our site on your domain, but a subset of our site. And that adds a lot of complexity to the middleware file as well, because suddenly we have to cater for all of those different cases. But this was kind of the core problem and solutions that we faced. Yeah. I guess that wraps it up. Again, we're hiring. If you're interested, come talk to me, Sharky, Sebastian, or Ryan. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope this was somewhat interesting. We have